right, guys, ready? Let's get to John Bloodgood, our guest speaker, KD0SFY. And he's already done his introduction, so I'm just going to turn it over to John and let him rock and roll. Thanks.
Okay, just want to make sure the microphone's working for the folks online. Okay, got a thumbs up there. So, all right. So again, my name is John Bloodgood, KD0SFY. I went through some of my amateur radio introductions earlier. What I do for a real job is I work out at Schriever, and I manage communications out there for just about every mission system out there. So everybody out here knows Schriever does all the mind control stuff? No? You guys haven't heard that one? Yeah, if you ever want a real hoot, look up Targeted Individuals Schriever, and you'll see what we're up to. Yeah, those guys have a helical fastener that's not been torqued correctly. But one of
John's car if there's a hailstorm, it goes to Schriever.
Yep. So, one of the things that I deal with out there is one of my customers that I work with is the U.S. Naval Observatory Alternate Master Clock, and I also do a lot with timing out there. So, let's see. Timing and frequency standards is something that's extremely important to communications and just basically to everything that we do, from your cell phone to getting money from an ATM to the stock market and banking, television, you name it. Timing and frequency is extremely important. And of course, for us in ham radio, timing and frequency is very, very important, because we're playing with radios. I mean, frequencies are part of it, right? But there's a lot more to it than that. And so we're going to go through some of these things and just run through a couple of definitions here really fast. So I'm going to talk about frequency standards. I'm going to talk about timing standards. A lot of times they get collectively referred to as timing or clock. And that gets a little confusing because frequency standards have no idea what time it is. All right? How many in here have heard of a cesium? Okay? The cesium beam is, we'll talk about it here in a minute, but extremely accurate frequency standard. Has no idea what time it is. Right? You've got a watch on, it's probably a quartz watch. You have to manually tell that watch what time it is. That watch doesn't know. Okay? So in order for your watch to be a good time standard, it has to have a good frequency standard. If you have a pretty cheap watch, it's going to lose some time. If you have a really nice watch, you know, it may be accurate to within a couple of seconds in a month or something. But one of the areas where you guys might be familiar with time standards is how many operate FT8? Okay, how many of you have seen somebody transmit outside the time slot? Okay, so what happens there is their time standard in their computer is off. And that's one of the things that we can fix pretty easily. And so we'll go through some of those things. Let's see. How about satellite passes? Yeah, played around with those. I love doing slow scan TV stuff when they do it from the ISS. They just finished up an event there. But you got to know when that pass starts and ends. And if you have an automated tracking system, which I don't, I just kind of manually pointed at that part of the sky. But if you have an automated tracking system, that really needs to know exactly where that satellite is. And that satellite's moving fairly quickly. So, hope you brought your calculators. No? Simple math, okay? Really simple stuff. basically what we're saying here is that time is the inverse of frequency. So if I have a time period, which is represented by t on this, that's the inverse of my frequency. Okay? Use the example here of 1 megahertz just to kind of explain it from two different ways. But real simple takeaway. Time is the inverse of frequency. When we talk about a period, when we're measuring a frequency, we're measuring the period of a cycle. The cycle is when that pattern repeats itself. So in this case, they're showing a period from the peak of 1 to the peak of when it starts again. Okay? When we measure how many cycles happened in a certain amount of time, that tells us what our frequency is. So megahertz is also known as cycles per second. So that's what we're looking for, is how many of those cycles happened in 1 second. And this may look familiar to you if you've ever had to calculate wavelength. Okay? I've shown you the longer way here, but I've also shown you the shortcut that we normally use. And normally you guys are not using 984 divided by 146 because you're usually looking for a half wave. So you're going to use something like 468. This is to figure out the entire wavelength itself. And you can see here that 146.52 megahertz falls in the 2 meter band. Oh, big shock there. So, but again, most of the time we use the shortcut, but going the long way shows you how it actually operates. So what is a frequency standard? Anything that creates a repeating pattern can be a frequency standard. If you have water dripping from your faucet and it drops at a steady rate, that can be a frequency standard. And believe it or not, people have built clocks like that. How about, has anybody been into one of those places where they've got one of those great big huge pendulums? I believe it's a Foucault's pendulum. Okay. It swings back and forth at a steady rate. Okay, so it's oscillating. Inside of a mechanical watch or mechanical clock, or if you have a grandfather clock, it's got the pendulum that swings back and forth. Quartz watches, they have an oscillator that is a quartz crystal that is excited by electricity to create a very accurate frequency. And that's what helps keep your clock or keep your wristwatch on time. So anything basically that's making that repeating pattern can be a frequency standard. We can sort these out. We divide them up into stratum levels, which we'll talk about here in another slide. But those tell us how accurate those standards are. Now, I'm sure some of us have gone out and bought a Timex watch or something like that and had a Seiko or something, and we compared the two, and the Timex was absolute crap compared to the Seiko or something, right? So you can get different degrees of quality. So no offense to anybody who's got a Casio or a Timex or whatever. But believe it or not, you've maybe heard the story about how the people who invented the quartz watch went to the Swiss first and said, hey, here's this great way of doing business. You know, this is cheap, it's easy to make, it's super accurate. And the Swiss wanted nothing to do with it. Because they were all, you know, locked into this mechanical thing. And I mean, they're works of art. They're beautiful. And the Japanese almost bankrupted them because the people who invented it went to, you know, the people in Japan and said, hey, we can build these clocks. They're more accurate than the ones coming out of Switzerland. And so that's what they did. Other than accuracy, you can, like I said, you can range from mechanical stuff to a LC circuit. Who knows what that is? Inductor and capacitor built together makes a tank, and so it'll charge and discharge. The old trusty triple nickel integrated circuit. I mean, man, the projects I built with those back in my teenage years. So crystal oscillators, we get into crystal oscillators. We can have the ones that are on your wristwatch or in your wrist. They're accurate. Then we get into temperature compensated and oven controlled. Then we move up into things like rubidiums and cesium beams and hydrogen masers. So if you have a house that you want to sell and buy a hydrogen maser, be my guest, because that's how expensive they are. So those stratum levels, these are beyond what your normal wristwatch is going to do. So stratum 3, hey, you're losing, what, a second every month. So you might have a wristwatch that comes close to that, but it's probably not going to make it. Stratum 2, yeah, now we're really talking about some accuracy. Stratum 1 is what a lot of us strive for in the telecommunications industry and when we're dealing with navigation and those kind of things. Stratum 1 is extremely accurate. 1 second in over 3,000 years. And believe it or not, there are clocks out there that are better than Stratum 1. So just give you an idea of what some of the accuracies that we're talking about. Yeah.
Is that at a certain temperature or is that cross temperature?
So typically these are going to be at a very stable temperature. We don't like temperature variations, and some of them, yeah, they're actually built into a temperature controlled room. So when a human being goes in that room, it causes a fluctuation in their accuracy. Just, yeah. So we kind of went through these a little bit. Crystal oscillators, you're going to find those everywhere. You're going to find them in your radios. You're going to find them in your cell phones. You're going to find them, wall clocks, wristwatches, television sets, I already said radio sets. Just about everything these days has some kind of a crystal oscillator in it. If we need more accuracy, then we can move up to the temperature controlled or temperature compensated or the oven controlled. Okay, so the temperature compensated, has anybody played with the SDRs, the little receivers? Okay, so you can, those little, if you get the little USB ones, those puppies can get hot. To keep them from drifting off, they actually use, you have the option of getting a temperature controlled or temperature compensated oscillator. So basically what that does is it takes the temperature of the device and it adjusts the voltage to try and keep everything in specs. An oven controlled one is basically we take that crystal oscillator, we put it in an oven that keeps it at a very specific temperature. So we don't allow it to vary. Rubidium. Anybody hear of that one? So not as famous as cesium, but rubidiums are very accurate. We use the heck out of them in a lot of systems. But now we're getting into the realm of the atomic clocks. And again, clock, this is a frequency standard. It doesn't know what time it is. But if I need to drive a very accurate time standard, this is the kind of oscillator that I really want. So now we're talking about a few $1,000s. So some of you may be able to write a check for that. Then we move to the cesium beams. The cesium beams are kind of the gold standard for a lot of folks. Cesium is radioactive, so I didn't bring one here because it's hazmat. But in the device down here, it actually has a rubidium inside of it. This cesium's going to set you back tens of thousands of dollars. I think it's about $7,000 just to replace the tube in it. Yeah. So tube's good for about 7 years.
You can stretch it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great business. What breed is it?
Oh. So, yeah, some of the areas I work in is like you can't walk around without tripping over a cesium. And then we get into the more exotic stuff, the hydrogen maser. Well, what's a maser? It's the same thing as a laser, basically, except for it works in the microwave spectrum. Okay. And atomic fountains. Can't drink from these. And if you look at one, it looks like a big stainless steel cylinder. But that inside that cylinder are more stainless steel cylinders, and they've all been pumped down so that the vacuum inside of those things is just absolutely incredible. And then they literally shoot atoms up and watch them as they fall. So it literally is a fountain. Going to be big. Hydrogen maser is going to be that big. I'm going to have to wheel it around because it's going to weigh a lot, and it's going to cost about as much as a small house.
John, where were they GPS disciplined on it so that it fall into this?
So a GPS disciplined oscillator is receiving a signal from the GPS constellation, and then it's tuning its internal oscillator to match what it's seeing from the GPS. GPS is going to provide you stratum 1. But as soon as you lose that GPS signal, then your oscillator goes into what we call holdover, and it will gradually degrade as it free runs until it settles in on its native stratum level. So if I have a rubidium and it's running at strata 2, I discipline it to stratum 1 using a cesium or the GPS constellation, and then all of a sudden I take that stratum 1 away. It will start to degrade almost immediately, but it will hold a very accurate level for a very long time until it finally gets down to its native stratum 2. So, again, these things, yeah, we're talking about, they cost more than a house. Hydrogen maser is going to cost just probably around $300,000. An atomic fountain, yeah, that's a nice house. That's a McMansion. Okay. So we talked a little bit about it. At the heart of just about everything that we deal with these days is an oscillator. And just to kind of understand how critical it is to have your oscillators correct, if you played around on HF on single sideband and you get that person who you know normally sounds like me and it sounds like they have inhaled helium, somebody's oscillator is off. You're tuned a little bit off frequency. He's tuned a little bit off frequency. His oscillator is starting to go a little wonky, something like that. So, you know, again, critical for navigation, banking, power grid, telecommunications industry. So this stuff, absolutely critical. You can do a frequency test on your radios, by the way, to see how accurate your stuff is. And if you're really good at tweaking your radio, you may be able to go in there and manually adjust it. Or you may just decide, okay, I know that I'm always going to be this many hertz high or low, so I'm just going to adjust my dial that much. If you have a really nice radio, it may have an external input for a 10 megahertz or a 5 megahertz signal from a system like what I've got here, and that's going to keep it very, very accurate. So if you go to a commercial radio station, they're going to have something like that. Time standards, okay, rely on those frequency standards. You can get time standards from a lot of different sources. But one of the problems we run into, especially around field day, is the guys want to go out and they want to do FT8. And they go set their computers up out in, the boondocks someplace, and they don't have any cell reception, anything at all, and their computer oscillator starts to drift, and next thing you know, they're 7 seconds off, which in FT8 would be absolutely horrible. So there's a bunch of different ways we can get these time standards. Most of us have heard of WWV. If you have an HF rig, you can always dial them up, and you can listen to them as they tell you what the time is. And you can manually set your computer clock. You can just wait until he says, at the tone, the time will be blah, 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 blah. Okay, you hit your button, right? There are other ways you can do that. You can get a program that will set it for you using that. Not sure how many folks here have a clock like this in their house. So this one automatically receives updates from WWVB. So the Lacrosse is a common company for these. And yeah, they'll keep your clock pretty well in sync. I have 2 of these. They never agree. If you do have cell reception, you can always do
U.S. Naval Observatory Master Clock. At the tone, Mountain Standard Time. 20 hours, 19 minutes exactly. Universal Time.
Okay. And that's similar to what you're going to hear over WWV if you tune them up on the HF. Okay? What you see in front of you over here is network time protocols servers. So yeah, if you want to swing those around so the guys online can see. So these are a really easy way to keep your computers in sync. They can range from less than $100 to several $1,000s. Now, let's see here. Most NTP servers trace back to GPS, NIST, or the U.S. Naval Observatory. And, to show you how important time is when it comes to GPS, if there's a time mistake of 10 nanoseconds, then we're going to be 10 feet off. Okay. So we already talked a little bit about FT8, talked about tuning up to WWV, manually syncing. You can use a software program I had mentioned before, Multi-PSK and Clock is a software suite you can download, and you can tune your radio up to WWV and run that through your sound card, and it will decode the WWV time syncs. There's actually data transmitted in there, and it will eventually sync your computer up. All depends on your reception. Yeah.
So what about the timeline, the speed of the transmission, speed of light?
So on some systems, they do take that kind of stuff into account. For most of the stuff that amateur radio is dealing with, we don't need to be that accurate. But yeah, with the GPS satellites being out in middle Earth orbit, we have to worry about the time delays. We also have to worry about time dilation because they're moving. And they have different gravity up there, so they get into all these Einsteinian calculations, things like that, yeah, they'll make your head hurt. But some of the ways that you can do this to keep yourself in sync is one of the devices I've got right here is a USB GPS hockey puck. Okay? These things, less than $50. You can take this in the field with you. You can hook it up to your computer, and that's what I've got right here, is just running the time on this computer, and it will keep you well within sub-second accuracy. More than good enough for FT8, or knowing when to call your net or start your satellite pass. The program I'm using here, the name of it is NMEA Time. NMEA is a type of data sentence. You can get a dedicated NTP server if you want to spend a little bit more money. I have one at my house, and that's what this time machines thing is. It's blinking over here. The clock next to it is just a display. It's an extra unit. But, I mean, this is a little device. It costs a few $100. But if you want to get something a little bit better than the puck, you can do that. And then the blue device down at the bottom, that is an actual dedicated network time protocol server that you would find in just about any telecommunications system. That particular one has a rubidium built into it, so that if I lose GPS signal, it will hold over until the GPS signal comes back. This one also has the capability of listening to WWV to get a time hack that way, and it can go what they call peer-to-peer and talk to other NTP servers to find out what time it is. So, those will cost you a few $1,000s. So then what I've got up on the screen here, some screenshots of some different software. So the one on the left is a software suite called Dimension 4. Dimension 4 uses simple network time protocol. It can sync up to just about any NTP server in the world. And the neat thing about it is it can act as a SNTP, Simple Network Time Protocol, server for other devices on your network. So you can point them all at one device and then have that one device go out and get. The multi-PSK and clock is on the right. So that's the one that you would use to try to decode the WWV signals using an HF radio. Some more pictures of some of the stuff that you see in front of you right here. And then we've got some of the official sources. There are a lot more than this. Commercial companies like Google and those kind of people, they have their own time standards. Other countries have their own time standards, but the official time standards for the United States, you're looking at the three. NIST is up in Boulder. If you ever get a chance to go up there and take a tour of the place, highly recommend it. Especially if you're a geek about time and things like that. Or if you just want to take a look at the NIST standard peanut butter, is you can buy the most expensive peanut butter in the world from NIST because they have standards of what is supposed to be in peanut butter. So, yeah, they have all kinds of standards like that, and you can order one of them if you want, but it's going to cost you some money. U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. This is the master clock. NIST is more R&D, but they have an incredible time system up there. The U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. is also the Vice President's residency. I believe it's not in this building, but right next to it. But they maintain synchronization with the folks all the way back in England at the Greenwich Observatory. U.S. Naval Observatory at Schriever, where I work, this is the alternate master clock for the Department of Defense and the United States. So the number I just called was actually a Schriever number. I didn't call Washington, D.C.
So the GPS, the GPS constellation is giving it standard retriever.
So GPS has timing standards on the satellites, and the guys out who fly those satellites are actually out at Schriever, and that's why the alternate master clock is out there. And they're constantly comparing what the satellites are sending down to what the master clock and alternate master clock say. So they make sure that those satellites are always extremely accurate. So they'll contact their satellites at least, absolute minimum, once every 24 hours. Some of their satellites, they're going to contact them every couple of hours.
Is that the new satellites that Lockheed was working with you guys for?
So Lockheed was working on the GPS-3 satellite, if that's what you're thinking of. So that's one of the newest generations of the GPS satellites. So the GPS satellites started coming online in the late 80s. I think that was the test run, though. I think the production ones, I think, came on in maybe the late 80s.
7 in the beach at Vandenberg in 82.
So, yeah, something like that. So we've gone through multiple iterations of the GPS satellites. A lot of them up there are what we call the Block 2 satellites. They're now launching the Block 3 satellites. Those are a little bit better, have some more capabilities. And they've even developed some newer and better oscillators that future systems are going to use that will replace, they basically make cesiums look like quartz. I mean, they're incredible. So the guys out at Schriever who fly those GPS satellites, that's what they do, is they're constantly checking against the standard, which is the U.S. Naval Observatory. In addition to maneuvering the satellites around and all the other things that they actually do out there.
What's their orbit?
So those are in medium Earth orbit. So those are, I'd have to look it up, but I believe they've got 3 orbital shells that they sit in. But they're out there a fair distance.
10,200 miles.
How much?
10,200 miles.
10,200. So halfway to geostationary or geosynchronous, yeah. So when you watch these GPS satellites, if you've got a GPS receiver on your phone or something like that, you can call up the sky view and it'll show you where all the satellites are. If you watch it for about a half an hour or so, you'll see that they moved. They move very slowly across the sky, unlike the ISS, which is in low Earth orbit, and it moves 10 minutes from horizon to horizon. So the alternate master clock out at Schriever, here's what they actually have for equipment. They have 3 of those hydrogen masers, and like I said, they're in their own rooms. And you don't go in that room unless it's absolutely necessary, because it will throw their accuracy off. They have 12 cesium beams, and then they've got 2 of those atomic fountains.
John, one more data point. It's 6 constellation planes for the GPS.
I'm sorry, what was that?
6 constellation planes for the GPS.
Okay, thank you. So, remember I told you I have 2 of these? And they never agree. That's one of the dangers with clocks, is trying to get them to agree is almost impossible. So if you go into my house, you go up into my radio room, you're going to see 2 of those. You're going to see that network time protocol server sitting there. You're going to see one of these USB pucks. Do I need that kind of accuracy in my house? Probably not. But it's fun. But one of the reasons why I do have that is I run a WinLink gateway and an APRS gateway out of my house. And it's set up so that if I lose my time protocol coming into my computer, if the internet gets disconnected, My computer still has the correct time. So that's why it also has 120 amp hours of batteries backing it up, and solar panels, and those kind of things. But anyhow, I hope you found that a little bit interesting. Yeah.
John, epoch time, the millisecond standard that computers are using, is that connected to the NIST or the Naval Observatory?
The epic time is basically part of the GPS system on how it keeps track of the time. But it does, I mean, they do have to reference their clock back.
Yeah, millisecond intervals.
Something like that, yeah. And then there's always, you know, they have to adjust leap seconds, and sometimes they have to move forward, sometimes they have to move backwards, all those kind of things. That the satellites themselves may not know that. You have to put that into the receiver at your home location or something. So in this one right here, I can go in and set that that particular offset.
Is the Naval Observatory responsible for choosing when leap seconds are introduced?
Yeah, you know, I can't talk too much about how the U.S. Naval Observatory itself does things, but there are international agreements that have to be gone through. So they're going to consult with the folks at Greenwich that manage UTC, and they're going to probably talk to a bunch of the other countries and say, yeah, we, the timekeepers of the world, decided that we need to add a second or subtract a second. So it's not the U.S. Naval Observatory just doing it on their own. It's actually international. Oh, by the way, let's see. The picture on the left is the U.S. Naval Observatory out in D.C. What do you guys see right next to, it may be hard to make out, but what do you see right next to the dome for the telescope? So there's a flagpole right there, and then there's a big ball. Guess where the ball falling in Times Square comes from? Naval observatories. That's how they would signal ships out in the harbor when to set their clocks. The ships needed to set their clocks very accurately so that they could tell where they were when they were out at sea, and they're using their sextant and looking at the stars, and they have their charts. They say, okay, at this time, this star is supposed to be right there. And if it's not, then I'm not where I think I am. So actually that thing does fall. And that's where, like I said, Times Square got their idea from. Theirs is a lot prettier than the U.S. Naval Observatories. So. Yeah.
Since you brought that up, I'll just mention there's a two-part miniseries out there called Longitude that is very good. And it's about the challenge of determining a ship's longitude and how the British scientific community resisted the simple solution for the more, basically resisted the input from an outside of the scientific community to someone who was within the scientific community. It's a fascinating story.
If anybody gets onto YouTube or Facebook and follows Neil deGrasse Tyson, he goes through a little bit of a spiel on that too. It's kind of neat. So that's timing and frequency and why it's important to us. Some solutions that you can implement if you want to spend a lot of money or just a little bit of money. Any other questions for me? I'm very interested in quantum stuff, quantum entanglement especially, because I think eventually it's going to revolutionize communications. I believe there's people who are playing with that kind of stuff, but I don't know of anything that's actually been produced. Yeah.
So what's the standard for the meter based on frequency or wavelength of a certain emission?
So they've redefined the meter a few different times. I'd have to look up what the current definition of, or standard of a meter is, but I do believe you're correct that they have used the wavelength of, it's not one wavelength, it's multiple wavelengths of a certain signal in a certain media. So, anything else? You're welcome to come up and take a look at this stuff. I know I went a little long, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.